Are these on? They are on. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Go ahead and take your seats. Come on in. We'll leave the doors open. People can trickle in as they come. It's an early morning. I know we've got some viewers here who might not be on mountain time, so it's not as early for you. But for the rest of us, we had a bright and early morning, although I am on Eastern time, as is Garrett, so it doesn't probably feel quite as early as it does to some of you. But I just wanted to welcome you all. My name's Janae Strachey. I'm the Grassroots Director for Heritage Action. And Garrett, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Garrett Best. I'm the Vice President of Heritage Action, and I think other than last year, this is sort of an annual event where we partner with Western Conservative Summit. So we're just happy to be here. It was a great experience in 2019, and we're looking forward to a similar experience this weekend.
All right, so I think we're just going to go ahead and dive in and start our slides here. So today we're talking about election integrity and how to save our states. We're going to start out by walking you through the buildup to this. We at Heritage Action have actually been working on this for quite a while, long before the 2020 election, and we know how important this issue is. It's not new, but the 2020 election certainly heightened it. And there were a lot of new issues that came with it, and with that came the political appetite to change some of our state-based laws. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. So we'll just go ahead and dive in and start out here with where we began in 2019.
Yeah, so this is, and I think this is really pertinent for people, particularly, it's not, so a lot of times, and again, Heritage Action, we're nonpartisan. I will freely admit that in this modern era with the leftward swing of the Democrat Party, it's increasingly difficult to find a Democrat that we can work with. But with that being said, I think that a lot of times in this conversation, we're going to have sort of a red-blue type of conversation. And this is important even if you live in a blue state. I was actually having a conversation last night at dinner with a gentleman from, I think he was from Centennial, and just talking about Colorado. And, Colorado is generally at this point in time controlled by people who are not conservatives. And this conversation, though, is actually for people in that situation as well. I think a lot of times we're looking at the landscape and we're seeing places like Georgia and Florida and Texas and Arizona working hard on this issue of election integrity. But in reality, the way that you sort of win back areas that have been lost to the left is through some of the stuff that we're going to talk about, particularly toward the end. But how we got involved in this, years ago, Hans von Spakovsky, who is a Heritage Foundation legal scholar, he used to work at the Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division and worked a lot in election law. And basically, they started maintaining a database because they were tired of hearing that there's no fraud ever. Now, a lot of people debate the 2020 election. I'm not here to really debate that. But the idea that fraud or just, frankly, incompetence doesn't skew elections or skew turnout is just wrong. The Heritage Foundation maintains a database that is now, I believe, 1,300 tried and proven cases of election fraud. Most recently, and one of the more dramatic ones was actually a Republican congressman from North Carolina had his election thrown out in beginning of 2019, the 2018 election, because of dramatic fraud on behalf of one of the contractors he used. And they actually had a runoff, and a new congressman was elected out of that. So this occurs, and it's something that erodes the trust of our elections. And we're supposed to be a country founded on this idea that we can choose our own leaders. We're not a monarchy. We're not a oligarchy, those types of things. We are a constitutional republic where we choose people to represent us. And if you start to erode that bond of trust with the election process, then you start to basically strike at the core of really the central idea to America. So that's sort of pre-2020. And so what we're going to talk about today is sort of a spinoff of election integrity, and that is sort of what you have to do on the ground in order to win with conservative ideas. In 2019, we commissioned a whole series of polls across the U.S., and polls can be bad. I will freely admit that. But polls can also be good, and they are a vital tool in assessing where people are. And so if you invest the appropriate amount of money and you talk to a large enough segment of people, and you can get a pretty good grasp of what Americans across society are thinking. So moving through 2019, we commissioned a whole series of polls that we've condensed into this one slide here, and you can see going into election 2020, pre-COVID, pre-violent unrest in the streets, what Americans were thinking and where not only the conservative base was, but also where independents who would lean conservative or who might turn out for conservative candidates were. And so you can sort of see that across the top. Rejecting, government control of your health care. Socialism was a big issue. Matter of fact, particularly in Florida, this was something that swung a couple congressional seats in Florida that nobody was expecting, and across the board. And some of these things are perennial problems. The right to life, the immigration border crisis now, et cetera. So we took this, and our goal was to find where the conservative base agreed on an issue with independent-minded voters, and then to create sort of a nexus between those two voters and turn out people based upon what their views were of these policy issues. So moving into 2020, we started a ground game effort, which was new for Heritage Action. We had always been in the federal lobbying and grassroots organizing business, and we turned, we sort of started a new part of that model, and that is get out the vote and efforts along turning out conservative voters. So Janae's team worked hard on that, so I'll let her talk through Project 2020.
Yeah, so before I jump into that specifically, just by a show of hands, how many of you are familiar with Heritage Action or part of Heritage Action? Okay. So roughly 50% of the room. Heritage Action is a sister organization to the Heritage Foundation. So we are the action arm, the grassroots lobbying. And that is why we were so passionate about this project and also perfectly set up because of people like you all across this country that saw the issues that we saw and wanted to help. What can we do? We're tired of screaming at our TV, being upset about these issues. We want to do something. We want to fight for our country. So as Garrett just talked about, we took that polling and decided, okay, now we want to mobilize to influence the elections. We're going to do that by winning people over, by winning the independents over. So the plan for Project 2020 was to take that polling and data that we took, and then our Sentinel program and our volunteers, and Sentinel are just grassroots all across the country, very similar to yourselves, who have decided that they want to be a part of the solution. They're building relationships with their members of Congress. They're staying up to date on what's happening on Capitol Hill and letting us know what's happening in their communities, just as importantly. So we built that team. We took our current infrastructure and built off that. And then we decided to have face-to-face conversations, phone calls. We did digital ads. We were targeting specific demographics, specific states, trying to win over these independent votes on the issues that they care about. So when our grassroots are knocking on someone's door, they knew exactly whose door they were knocking on. They knew what issue they cared about. So they weren't just blindly saying, oh, hey, let's talk about the election. They knew what was going to get that person involved, because I think most of us in here would agree, after talking to people all across this country, most of the people are conservative. They just don't know it. And when you can talk to them about the issues, when it's not so polarized, when they don't feel like they have to pick a side and, sign their name to a specific candidate, when you're talking about the issues that they care about, that they're seeing in their communities, whether it's their kids in their schools or their neighbors or, religious freedom, you name it, the polling that we did informed what issues those cared about. And then the data we gathered about those voters, our door knockers knew exactly who they were talking to and how to have those conversations, which is really important, that we don't fall flat face when we're having these conversations, and that it's not just a dry, statistical, factual conversation, but that we're meeting them in the emotion of these issues and then engaging them with the facts so that they come over to our side and hopefully stay on our side for years to come. So 2020, as you all know, I don't have to tell you, was not the year we expected it to be. So we quickly figured out that our door knocking program was going to have to be changed because of COVID, and everything had been completely shut down. So we pivoted from our door knocking to phone calls. And this actually turned out to be incredibly successful because people were home. So they were actually answering their phones. They also weren't having a lot of engagement with people, so they were excited and ready to talk. So you can see by the numbers on the screen here that we actually had great success in reaching people with the numbers. And then as soon as we were able to start door knocking in June, we hit the ground running. We were the first organization to be out there and took all the precautions that we could to make sure whoever's door we were knocking on, they would feel comfortable standing away from their door. So regardless of their view, that they would feel comfortable that we were at their door and still engage them. And that was also very receptive. So we had a lot of great success with that as well. Now, I want to shift a little bit from that ground game specifically and lean into what happened in 2020 a little bit as well. There's some snippets up here on the screen about the open letter that Jessica Anderson, our executive director at Heritage Action, penned to Grassroots America. And this came because of everything that was going on in 2020 and the heightened emotions, everything from, our lives being completely shut down, businesses being closed, people being told that they can't worship when and where they want to worship. You're not allowed to sing. You're not allowed to hug your family. You're not allowed to hold the hand of your dying family member. You're not allowed to save your business. Oh, and by the way, riots in the streets are okay. We're going to let them burn those businesses down. And you can protest in thousands, but you can't gather in a group of 15 for a family celebration. And it was really an injustice that was happening across the country, and we were seeing it on issue after issue after issue. It wasn't just one. And we made a promise to Grassroots America that we were going to lean into these fights. We're not going to shy away. We're not going to cower in fear of the left, and fear of the riots, and fear of being canceled, and fear of the backlash. We're going to lean into these fights, and we're going to stand up, because if we don't, we will lose everything. And that means fighting at every possible level, not just the federal level, which legislatively is what we had been doing previously. So we made this promise to lean into that, and initially started fulfilling that with things like pledge to open our American societies, which we sent to all the governors across America, asking them to reopen, which was very successful, but led into something else. So I'm going to play a quick video for you.
One individual hurled a gasoline bomb into the city county building, which holds the city's 9/11 dispatch center in Judea.
We have all seen the lawlessness and the anarchy that is played out in our country's cities, in our neighborhoods. Today, we launched Fight for America, going on offense to advocate for American values and institutions in the face of radical extremism, continuing our support to champion the law enforcement.
I work with exceptional deputies, police officers, troopers. We have people that truly want to get out there and do good. I am very happy that the Heritage Foundation and Heritage Action are willing to stand up, are willing to speak for the silent majority.
Security is the foundation of our prosperity. You have a president, you have an administration that are committed to law and order and to supporting men and women who serve on the thin blue line.
So we developed the police pledge. And Garrett, I'm going to let you talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, so out of that open letter to Grassroots, one of the key philosophies at the center of that was, I think it was in that first sort of snippet from the letter itself. We were sitting there, and Janae and I both work in DC. I'd like to just say behind enemy lines. We're not of DC, we're from DC. So anyway, we're sitting there, and we're shut down. Our offices were prohibited from opening, like those kinds of things. And we are we are sensing in conservative grassroots America that we are the ones being held back while the left is able to sort of run wherever they want across the country. And you know, there was a great sense of frustration. So how do we push back? How do we start this pushback? And as we're talking through this, I think the conservative mind is a very structured mind. It's a very organized mind. It's a very organized thought process. It's you have the federal government, and then you have the state government, and then you have your local government, and all these things are categories that you work in. And I think the left is really ahead of us in some ways, in that they don't necessarily see a structured environment. They see where they have power and they exploit it for their purposes, no matter whether it fits into our sort of quote unquote structured system of government. And so Heritage Action, as a grassroots organization, what we decided really was we needed to, while not giving up the principles of things like federalism that keep our country organized, but realize that we need to sort of meet the left at every area of society that they are opposing us. And so for the first time, we started, at least that I am aware of, we started sort of branching outside of our traditional roots of talking to a member of Congress, talking to a senator, those kinds of things. And we started trying to organize Americans that believe similarly. The police pledge was what was one of the main efforts that came out of that. There were some other a little bit smaller efforts. Janae mentioned the Open American Society. But the police pledge really caught on. And I think why it caught on is we were sitting there thinking, how can we as an individual Americans show that we do not agree with what we're seeing on the TV? And so we did two things. And one is we had sort of a component of the pledge that was for individual Americans to sign, to say, yes, as Garrett Best, I believe that law enforcement is a crucial component of our society. And then we had a portion of the pledge that was directed at elected leaders and candidates. And we were actually a little surprised at how overwhelmingly successful that was. For the first time, a lot of these pledges are designed to capture a congressperson who's running for office. And we decided, no, you know what, this is bigger, right? This is bigger. So we started everything from school board members to county commissioners, and hundreds of elected officials across the country added their name to this. Everyone from U.S. senators down to very, very local level, such as school boards and county commissioners and that kind of thing. One part of that was a visual aspect. We ran a lot of digital ads around it. We organized events around it. We had people, we had yard signs that we couldn't even keep in stock. They were flying off the shelves so quickly. But we also sort of took it to the heart of big cities across the country. And you can see everywhere from like New York Times Square in New York to Dallas to Atlanta. And we started putting up these big billboards, basically just saying, no, you know what? It is important to this community. It's important to us that the police know that there's Americans who support them. Obviously, no one is ever perfect, but this idea that we're going to better society by eroding police is just ridiculous. So that was sort of we launched that video. Matter of fact, a lot of that video came from the launch of the police pledge, which was in Des Moines, Iowa, in August of 2020. Vice President Pence came, Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf came, Senator Ernst came, and some other dignitaries. And it was, I will just tell you, behind the scenes, you don't notice it, but it was the most sweltering, humid, hot day we've ever been in. And we were out in this barn that wasn't air conditioned, launching this police pledge with all these law enforcement officers in body armor and stuff. So it was a great day. So obviously we get through the federal election in 2020. We come out on the other side, a lot of uncertainty, but the one thing that was certain was that Georgia was going to a runoff. And so out of our ground game of Project 2020, we immediately turned to Georgia, and within about a week of the election, we were on the ground in Georgia, knocking on doors. And Janae's going to talk a little bit more about that, because it was Sentinel led, and the grassroots team is really at the heart of that.
Yeah, so I'm not going to go too in the weeds on this because really what the purpose of today is to give you an overview of some touch points of like all the different things that we're doing. And the grassroots letter that I referenced earlier, as I said, we were going to fight in every different way possible in all aspects of society, as Garrett said. So it was everything from leaning into, mainstream narratives, the police are bad, they're all racist, they're out to get us, and steering away from getting into this like, oh, well, there are some bad apples. Let's talk about reform. I think everyone can agree that there's always room for us to improve. There's always room for us to be better, but we were not going to feed that narrative and lean in that direction to the left. We were going to take a stand and say, no, you've gone too far. We will not defund the police. That's a line in the sand that we're going to draw, and Americans are on that side of all demographics. All demographics. So another aspect of that is the legislation and winning elections and being on the ground. So as Garrett said, the Senate runoff became the next big fight, and we're just jumping from thing to thing to thing. And so we had over 300 volunteers to be poll workers at the Georgia election on January 5th. But leading up to January 5th, Garrett and I were both down there for 7 weeks. We would go down and meet with a group of sentinels. We had full-time door knockers that were knocking throughout the week. And then sentinels would come down and join as they could. I mean, honestly, I'm so inspired working with all of you and our sentinels across the country, because they are literally sacrificing their vacation time, taking time off work. They're spending their personal hard-earned money to drive to Georgia to help knock doors because they knew how important this was and they were going to fight for it. So it was pretty discouraging to lose that election after all that we put into it. But what we walked away with is a lot of data to see what worked and what didn't work. And we did see the numbers in the counties around Atlanta go up. So we knew that we were in the right place. And unfortunately, I think there were a lot of Georgians that stayed home thinking that their vote didn't matter. And I empathize with their frustration, but there's a sure way to hand elections to the left, and that's to just not show up and to give up. So we felt really strongly about fighting and did walk away with a lot of great data from that we are using to build a model of where do we go from here. So we are not giving up there. And Garrett, I know that we want to talk a little bit more about how Georgia became Georgia in regards to that, and then we'll jump into our election integrity.
Yeah, so that we did all this to show you the work that conservatives across the country were doing in the run up to 2020. And even though we're in the quote unquote business, it's easy to sit there on an election night and the candidates that you have put a lot of hope in, the candidates that you've worked hard for, and to be discouraged. But the thing about politics is whether you're on the left or on the right, victory is never permanent and defeat is never final. The fight is always with us. It's a constant struggle to win over new Americans to our perspectives, to show Americans that if you can put in place certain policies, then all of us will benefit. Those kinds of things. But there's also like mechanical things that you have to do. And that's what Janae's referring to is, okay, as an organization, what do we do with, we have tens of thousands of sentinels across this country and a broader group of grassroots activists of nearly 2 million. So how do we as a 2 million strong organization employ ourselves in the best way? And so I just want to point out a couple things as we work toward what we think is the next big thing for conservatives. This is the state of Georgia. In 2010, you can see at the bottom there, it may be a little small for y'all, but I'll read it. Senator Isaacson was in a runoff against a Democrat candidate and earned almost 500,000 more votes than the Democrat Senate candidate in 2010. And if you look then at 2012, Senator Romney versus President Obama for the presidential election earned 300,000 more votes. And then right here, there's a crucial thing that occurs right here. long before she was a gubernatorial candidate, Stacey Abrams began grassroots activism on the left in Georgia. And she started a big voter registration project in Georgia, which, as you can see, in 2013, you move up to 2014, Senator Perdue now wins by about 200,000 votes. 2016, President Trump has the one blip in this entire scenario, and he gets about another 13,000 more than Senator Perdue did in 2014. But the trend line is still trending downward. 2018, Governor Kemp earns only 55,000 more votes than Stacey Abrams. And then in 2020, 2021, President Trump was trailing Joe Biden by about 12,000 votes. I think it's down to around 11,000 if I remember correctly now. And then we all know how the Senate runoffs go. So while a lot of the energy on our side was around sort of fraud and that kind of thing, there's also something else that is going on, and that is the left was inspired to take Georgia into their sort of political camp, and they were massively outmaneuvering conservative activists on the ground. Particularly the Georgia GOP in about 2015, 2016 sort of shuts off, I'm going to use that term, it's not entirely fair, but shuts off sort of their voter registration efforts. And the left kept going. Stacey Abrams runs about 4 different not-for-profits in Georgia that are almost exclusively sort of organized in such a way to drive people into a voter registration funnel. And so you can see the effect on Georgia. If we can go to the next slide, Janae. I want to use just an anecdote too. This is how powerful voter registration drives are. In 2018, Crystal Matthews was running against an incumbent for a state house race, a longtime incumbent. I think he'd been elected 4 or 5 times, and she raised only $700. And you know, if you're involved in politics at all, you know that $700 just is not much at all. And so she was sitting there looking at a multi-term incumbent. She only has $700. What is she going to do that's most effective? And she made a decision to spend all $700 of those dollars on identifying people that would most likely agree with her on her policies and registering them to vote. I think the next slide sort of lays out. So she ended up winning by 7 percentage points. Now, her opponent, and I don't think we have this on here, but her opponent had, if I remember correctly, around $150,000, $200,000 that he spent in his campaign. She spent $700 and won. Now she's running against Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina this cycle, and she's going to have a lot more money at her disposal. And her goal is to register more than 100,000 new voters in South Carolina. Now, a state like South Carolina, you know, if she registers 130, 150,000 new left-leaning voters, that is putting the state of South Carolina squarely in play. And so she's copying the Stacey Abrams playbook of Georgia. And so one of the things that we need to do is recognize that there are broad thematic things where we can talk about election fraud and stuff, but there's also key mechanical things that you have to do in politics in order to win. And that's really where we're moving toward. We started in 2019 identifying issues that motivate voters that we agree with. We then tried to turn them out in 2020, despite all the COVID and all the police stuff, still tried to move people that agreed with us generally to the polls. And now sort of we're entering this other phase where we're trying to counterbalance these efforts by people like Stacey Abrams in the States. So Janae is going to be heading up this project for us. So she's going to talk through a little bit what we're envisioning. And we definitely want to do some like question and answer here at the end.
Yeah, we'll definitely save some time for that. And before we go to the next slide, I just want to know, as Garrett has touched on, there can be more than one thing true at the same time. So we're battling a lot of different things, and it's an uphill battle for conservatives. We don't have the media on our side. We often don't have money on our side. There's a lot of different battles that we have, but One thing that we will say, going back a few slides when I was talking about our 2020 efforts, we shifted to phone calls immediately, and then we started door knocking as soon as we could. And it actually is really powerful and important to be having face-to-face conversations. And the left didn't have that during 2020. So while the election didn't turn out the way that we wanted it to, and there are many reasons for that, one of them being fraud and incompetence, as Garrett said earlier, and bad state laws that allow for shoddy activity. But there was not the blue wave that everyone had expected, that, Democrats run this country and everybody's upset, everybody's rioting in the streets, and nobody wants police anymore. Like, the mainstream narrative was so out of touch with where Americans really were. And not having a ground game for the Democrats actually did hurt them. So what we've decided is that there's two different components to this. One, election integrity, and two, the permanent ground game. So one, we decided to do something that we haven't done in the past, and that's step into state lobbying. And there's a lot of different components to this, because even though we have lobbied at the federal level for years and years and years, there's a lot of laws and regulations around it that are actually very different at the state level. So it's a completely different operation, but we knew that this fight was crucial for our country, because if we lose our elections, everything else we fight for, we lose, including our free speech and our ability to fight for these issues. So we decided to take that step and to dive into it, and we've been actually quite successful in a handful of those states. And the reason that's so important is because while we can't always stop fraud, what we can do is make it easier to detect and easier to prove and stop and enforcement. And so our goal has been to make it easier to vote and harder to cheat. It's very common sense, easier to vote and harder to cheat. And we've been fighting in states across the country for that. And then the permanent ground game is everything that we've been talking about. We have to have these face-to-face conversations. We've got to continue engaging people in their homes and in their communities. So this is a huge project for us. We've committed a significant amount of money to this. And again, we have to fight on all fronts. So it might get exhausting at times. You feel like this is a constant battle. As Garrett said, victory is never permanent, defeat is never final, which means we don't get to win and then go home and take the next 2 years off. We have to continue engaging. That means engaging on the federal level and the state level. So I'm going to let Garrett talk about the federal aspect of this, but that's stopping HR 1, S1, and now HR 4. There's been all sorts of developments around this on Capitol Hill. And then it's tackling the state-based election laws to make sure that our states aren't actually allowing for fraud.
Yeah, I'm not going to belabor this point a ton, because I'm confident that y'all have heard a lot of this already. But in 2018, so just real briefly, whenever you see a bill numbered 1 through 10, you know that is the priority of the Speaker of the House. So generally speaking, if you care about a bill, it's HR 3223 or whatever, right? Well, that's because HR 1 through 10, everything is done in a numerical order. When a member of Congress introduces a bill into this little hopper on the side of the dais of the Speaker's office, the clerk pulls it out, calls down to the desk, and writes the next bill number on it, drops it back in, and that becomes a bill. That's how you file a piece of legislation in the House. But HR 1 through HR 10 are reserved for the Speaker's priority bills. And generally speaking, they follow sort of in order of priority. And so HR 1 is generally the party in power's main issue that they care the most about. So 2018, the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives. Speaker Pelosi is reelected a second time for Speaker of the House. And in 2019, they introduced HR 1, which is an overhaul of our entire election system. The easiest way to think about it is it prohibits states from doing anything along the lines of voter integrity, election security, and it forces them to accept these new federal standards that are, frankly, I don't know why somebody would support them. because they introduce so many aspects of where you could commit fraud. And so I'll just say this real quickly, a couple components just to highlight what we mean by this in case you haven't heard. No voter ID is allowed under HR 1. Okay, so no voter ID. So let's keep this in mind. No voter ID. Same day registration. Okay, so you show up to the poll to vote. You're not a registered voter. You can register on the spot and then vote. So same day registration. And some states have this already, by the way. And then a third component is that the federal law requires states to allow a person to vote in whatever precinct they show up in. Okay, so now singularly on their own, we kind of wince at them, particularly the voter ID, like what's wrong with just identifying, making sure that the person is who they say they are. But think through what this allows under HR 1. One is, if I'm Garrett Best, I can show up to any precinct I want. I can register at that precinct on the same day. I can vote in that precinct on the spot. It's not a provisional ballot. It goes straight into the sort of general election count. And there's no way for them to verify that I am who I say I am. And so you can imagine now, most Americans, I believe, are actually honest people. I believe most Americans don't try to commit fraud. But if I did want to commit fraud, particularly where I live, their precincts are very dense where I live. I could actually precinct hop, and I could just claim a new name in each precinct. I could register on the spot under that new name. They couldn't check it in any way. I could then cast a ballot on the spot that then goes into the count. And that's just one aspect of HR 1. It doesn't get involved with the federal financing of political candidates who you may or may not agree with. And by the way, political candidates can pull salaries out of their campaign accounts. And so you're subsidizing not only their campaigns, you're also subsidizing their personal income. And we could go on and on and on through HR 1 and S1. But this is vital to stop this bill. The one thing that really does stand in the way of this becoming law, because the House already passed it, is the filibuster in the Senate. And I'm not going to belabor that point here today, but just know that a lot of work is going on behind the scenes to ensure that the filibuster stays in place. Because if the filibuster goes away, then we're not only talking about HR 1, we're actually talking about a lot of other things that we also disagree with. But the crucial component of HR 1 is that it sort of tosses out state rules around elections. And so while we were fighting HR 1 and S1, and then like Janae alluded to, HR 4, which we talk about quite a bit on our website, Janae's team has been working hard to ramp up efforts in the states to basically ensure best practices are followed under state law for elections. And that's where we've spent a lot of effort over the past 5 or 6 months.
That's right. And you can go to saveourelections.com to see the states we've worked in and the laws that we're fighting for. The Heritage Foundation put out a paper that lists the best practices in all different aspects of voting. So that's absentee voting, it's early voting, it's mail-in ballots. It goes through each of those, what should be allowed, what shouldn't be allowed. And Garrett talked about voter IDs. Another aspect is the absentee mail-in ballots, which actually that was a really big deal this last year because of COVID. A lot of states decided they were going to blanketly mail out applications or ballots to all of their citizens. Well, that completely opens the door for fraud because there is no accountability. That person doesn't know that they have a ballot coming. I know many people I've talked to, just myself personally, who received multiple ballots in all of the different places they'd lived. Some of those places they hadn't lived in over a decade and still got a ballot at those locations. So it opens the door for fraud. As Garrett said, even if I individually am not intending to commit fraud, well, the people who want to can just harvest those ballots. So you go to saveourelections.com to check this out more, but I want to show you guys a quick video. And before we show that video, I just want to say that all of these efforts that we're working on, we're working at the federal level, the state level, messaging, talking points, winning people over, data, all of it, we at Heritage Action are doing this for you. We're doing it for our families, our future families, and we're here to support you. So when we come in the state and are working on the state-based state-based reforms. We're working with groups already on the ground. We're working with people in their communities, so they're talking to their neighbors and know that community, know the things that they care about, because we want to be a resource to you and to be fighting alongside you. I know as an individual, it feels like, man, what can I do? Or, you know, if I speak out, I might lose my job. And we know the pressure that you're feeling. So we as an organization want to do everything we can to give state lawmakers the support that they need, to give you guys the support that they need.
I think it's important. I'm going to play this video here in a second, or Janae can. I want to highlight one thing. We've all heard so much about the Georgia election law. Do you know that the Georgia election law started with a sentinel? There was a sentinel in Georgia who in January took some of Hans's writings, organized a letter amongst conservative grassroots in Georgia, ended up with more than 2,000 signatures on it, took it to their state representative, and out of that came the Georgia election law. Now, certainly our role is to support that with resources and lobbying and those kinds of things, but this was done by sentinels in Georgia. This is not a top-down structure that we're talking about here. We're talking about y'all being on the front lines and us doing our part to support y'all. So you'll see in this, because we were at the center of so much of it, that the name Heritage Action comes up a ton. But whenever you hear Heritage Action, think of yourself, because we're not talking about Janae and I. We're actually talking about y'all, and in particular, when Stacey Abrams is talking, she's talking about our sentinels in Georgia.
This is a coordinated attack on our democracy by Heritage Action, by the Republican National Committee.
So lots of swing states. Here's a map of all the restrictive voting laws that we're seeing going up across the country.
Heritage Action says it plans to spend $24 million in 8 battleground states.
Heritage Action, the lobbying arm.
The Heritage Action Fund. Heritage Action.
Everything that's on the Heritage list.
Heritage Action for America.
Do you think we made them mad? It's always
those are the
good
nicer
time.
clips that we can actually publish.
That's right. And if you are a Sentinel or join Sentinel, you can come to our Sentinel Summit this November. It's November 11th through 13th in Orlando. And we hope to show you some of the other clips where they actually were mentioning Sentinels by name as well. And they're talking about Sentinels as this like a mystical creature, like, oh, these Sentinels, this DC dark money group. And they're like as if you guys don't exist. You guys are the left's worst nightmare. They don't want you to be real, because they know if you're real, we're going to keep being successful. The state lawmakers are going to keep responding to their voters. That's why they have their jobs. The left does not want you to exist. So be encouraged and empowered by the video that you just saw, because they're going to do everything they can to make us look bad, but it gets us excited and empowered, and it should for you as well. And you know, even the way we talk about this, they're always going to twist the narrative. They've been talking about voter ID, voter suppression. It's so bad. It's so bad. Well, you need a voter, or you need an ID to be an active part of this society. You need an ID to get on an airplane. You need an ID to pick up tickets at will call. You need an ID for anything at the DMV, any government building you're entering. It doesn't matter. You need an ID to be an active part of the society. So when they say having an ID is voter suppression, ask them why they don't want those people to be a part of our society. If you don't have an ID, you're going to have a hard time being a part of what's going on in our communities. So if you don't have an ID, let's get you an ID. It's very easy to get an ID. Every state makes them readily available, and we'll give it to them for free if they cannot afford the usually small charge. So anytime they talk about that being voter suppression, I would just flip that narrative on them and ask them, why do you not want those people to be a part of our society?
All right, so it's not just legal reforms. I was mentioning, there's actual things that need to be done on the ground. And so this is what we're doing moving forward. We actually are about 2 months into a big project that is not public yet, in which we are going through particularly battleground states initially, but we hope to expand it across all 50 states. We are going to put together an educational manual so that people know what it takes to be a poll watcher if you want, but the poll workers are actually the most crucial. They're the people that are actually hired by the supervisor of elections to manage the poll itself. And so you can have all the legal reforms you want in place. You can stop HR 1. You can have the Georgia election law passed or the Arizona ones that have passed. But if you don't actually have people that are competent and are trustworthy actually on the day of election managing those polls or in the early balloting or mail balloting when the mail ballots are opened or whatever this process is in your state, it's crucial to have poll workers in those scenarios. And so one of the big efforts that we're trying to do is we're trying to not just Sentinels, but also our broader grassroots network and also people outside that just care about this stuff, is to bring that education to them. We're going to be rolling this out in the November Sentinel Summit, like Janae mentioned. We have some experts from President Trump's campaign and Senator Rick Scott from Florida's Senate campaigns who are helping us put together this resources. We're also going to be involved a lot in registering voters. This is something I didn't talk about, or Janae and I didn't talk about when we were talking about Project 2020. It wasn't just identifying people. We were also identifying if they weren't registered, trying to register them. We're actually going to ramp up that effort, and y'all will certainly hear a lot of it because y'all will be on the front lines of that. But our goal is to register voters. And this is where I was talking about even places like Colorado where you may think, what's the point, right? Look what Stacey Abrams did in Georgia. You could have never predicted 10 years ago that we would have the result in Georgia that we have had this past year. But the left commits themselves, no matter what the numerical advantage or disadvantage that they're in, to flipping a state. And we have to be as committed. This is something that's near and dear to my heart. I'm going to take off my heritage hat for just a second. But I think too often we think of like red, blue, and we're so busy sort of trying to defend, quote unquote, the territory that we do well in. And I think that's wrong. I think that we should be actively looking for and winning people to our side no matter where they live. And so places like New England, places like places like Colorado and the West Coast, those places, there are people that are conservatives there that feel that they are left behind. They feel that they are on their own. And this is something that's very important to me, is to find those people and help them start winning back in their communities as well. And then we're gonna work hard to not only identify people that agree with us, but then turn them out to vote. In Georgia, for 1 second, we have identified about 700,000 conservatives in Georgia that think like us, believe like us, but who are not registered to vote. Now, you're not going to register all 700,000 of them, but we do think that we can register, probably just given data models that we've used in the past, about 300,000 of them. And out of those 300,000, you can expect to turn out about 150, 200,000 maybe on a good day. But that number would actually have prevented the majority control of the Senate from slipping. And it certainly would have prevented Georgia from voting for President Biden. So this is a real life consequence type situation when you aren't registering new people that agree with you. So that's a big effort, but at the heart of it is Sentinels. And Janae's going to wrap up here.
Well, before we play this video, we've got a few minutes. I'd love to go ahead and take Q&A, and then we'll close with this video. And I actually want to bring Rebecca Warwick up as well. She is the regional coordinator. We've got staff on the ground all across the country that are your direct line. So questions that you have, events you want to host, trainings that you have. So she'll come up and speak for a few minutes as well. But let's go ahead and take some questions. So the question was about Heritage Action's tax status. We are a 501c4. So the foundation, our sister organization, is a C3. They are a think tank. They're writing the policy and have research analysts. And then we get to be the action arm of that. Go ahead. Yeah, I should have given you a microphone so that our listeners could hear that wonderful, beautifully phrased question. But to paraphrase, the question was about the media. Every time we have a state-based reform or a new law passed, the media, of course, is going to do a hit piece on that. They're going to make it sound like the worst thing possible. So the question was, what are we at Heritage Action doing to combat that? We touched on it a little bit throughout this, but we've done a ton of digital ads, some TV ads, so that people are seeing that in their home as well. If the news is talking about it, the next commercial is a Heritage Action commercial talking about that. And actually, if I can pull it up, I can show you one.
So in Georgia, like for example, so we picked out initially 8 states to focus our national resources on. Now we worked with Sentinels in a lot of different states. There's states like I think Tennessee, Missouri, a bunch of others that have passed individual laws, but you know, we have finite resources, so we had to direct hard dollars into certain areas. Georgia, we have spent and will continue to spend. We've spent so far about $3 million on TV and digital ads in Georgia. Georgia has been one of the more expensive states just because of Stacey Abrams' presence in the state and how much media circulates around that. Georgia has been a little bit of ground zero for this effort. So we've spent the most money in that state. We'll probably, I mean, don't quote me on this, but I think probably by the time that we're sort of done with sort of pushing back on the narrative, probably in the 5 million range, which is a lot for an organization like ours to do. I would say this, take heart though, because we are actually winning this message on the ground, because, you know, the underlying philosophy is not to keep an American from voting. The underlying philosophy is to give every American confidence that their vote counts and to provide a transparent process for that vote to count so that they can be assured of that. It's hard enough to lose an election. You don't want to also have associated with that and a feeling that you were somehow defrauded of your vote. I was in Texas 2 weeks ago. We were talking to somebody, and this was actually a Democrat voter who showed up at the poll to cast their ballot, and their ballot had already been cast, and there was she had definitely not voted. And so there are people that are unscrupulous who do go out there and take advantage of certain segments of voters. And people actually do lose their vote. They lose their say in their government. And so what we don't want is we don't want a system in which one side is slanted against the other via the process that is set up. We want a transparent, fair process so that then we can debate the ideas and we can have confidence on the other side that we won or lost based upon our ideas and how well we presented them. I think we were trying to pull up some of
All right, I'm not sure if it's gonna work. So I think that it's on our Facebook page though, but we ran a TV ad. I was hoping to show it to you, but.
Any other questions?
Rebecca's nodding her head. Do you know about this?
I'm vaguely familiar with that. I don't know exactly what the components are. I don't know. Sorry, the question for the TV audience was about in Colorado, the Colorado Democrat blueprint is what you said. Do you know? Okay.
Hi, everybody. Real quick, I'm Rebecca Warwick. I'm the Colorado coordinator with Heritage Action. I actually went to school at CCU, started here in Denver. I now live in Texas, but I do come back up in here and see you all and work with you. So the questions about the blueprints, I did read that book. And really, that actually fits in with the slide that Garrett showed about what happened in Georgia, is Democrats have been playing a long game in registering people, getting involved at the local level to get people on their side. And that's kind of what we have to be doing as conservatives in Colorado. And that's part of the Sentinel program, is working at the local level with Sentinels in their communities, in their state house districts, and in their congressional districts about what's going on and how can we organize and push back. We're already kind of seeing that pop up in states, not only in Colorado, but across the country on issues like election integrity, issues like critical race theory, where it's not just this blue versus red, but it's about the values that our country is supposed to have, the values that you want your kids to be taught in school. So Democrats had a long game in Colorado and other states, and they're continue pushing that. And everything we're doing at Heritage Action is to have that long-term view as well, to not have this categorized of, this level here and this here, but to really play the long game in our communities, to educate people, inform people, and to, kind of take that Sam Adams quote. Doesn't take a majority to prevail, but a tireless minority setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. And that's what Sentinel is all about. And that's how we're going to play that game in Colorado and in states across the country, is to be the ones leading in our communities, educating on the issues, and pushing back on our lawmakers, making sure that they know we exist. I did want to add, because Garrett didn't mention it, talking about HR 1, and he brought up, same registration, no voter ID and stuff. And these are some things that Colorado already has in our voting systems. But one way that I think is pushing back on the senators here in Colorado who are showing support for HR 1, senators from Colorado tend to run as, I'm a moderate, I'm representing a moderate Colorado. How moderate is it that in HR 1, first of all, it funds political campaigns with taxpayer dollars, a 6-to-1 matching program. I don't think that's very moderate. I don't think Colorado taxpayers want to be on the hook funding campaigns across the country, people that they don't support. And then moreover, HR 1 also turns the FEC into a hyper-partisan board. So that's the Federal Elections Commission, right? Currently, it's divided 3-3, so a total of 6 people, 3 from each party. HR 1 takes that down to 5. 3 from one party, 2 from the other. How moderate is that when one party is rigging federal elections in their favor? We should be pushing back on that in Colorado, making sure every Colorado voter knows that the senators from Colorado, they are not pushing moderate policies. They are marching in lockstep with Chuck Schumer, with Nancy Pelosi, with the Biden administration to undermine any confidence in our elections and to rig the game in their favor with taxpayer dollars and with a hyper-partisan board. So that's on HR 1. So in Colorado, we have an uphill battle, but I love Colorado. I know that it's not the end for Colorado. We can make a change here. People are waking up in our communities at what's going on in our state, and we have to continue fighting because it's going to be up to us, the people in this room, to be setting those brush fires of freedom and to be as vocal as possible every step of the way at every level, so people know what's going on and that they are not alone in this fight. There's conservatives in this room right now, there's conservatives online, and there's Sentinels across the state. There's almost 600 Sentinels in Colorado. That number is growing daily, to be holding lawmakers accountable and educating their communities on the issues. We can have the most influence because we're the business leaders, we're the community leaders, we're the ones our friends and neighbors look to. So let's not be fearful, let's not be scared to talk about what's going on, and let's show that we're going to be courageous and bold because we know that the values that we have are the values that most Americans have, as our polling shows and continues to show in the issues. There are sign-up cards on your table. A few of you are already Sentinels, so you're getting our strategy call, you're getting our strategy call notes, you're getting event invites. Like for myself, I had an event last night in Centennial. You'll get an invite to our Sentinel Summit in Orlando this fall. All of this is to make sure that you know what's going on, not only the policies, but the process, the players, the playing field, as well as to be in coordination, both statewide and nationwide on the issues. So, when you make that phone call, there's 20,000 plus people making that phone call with you that day. When you show up to that rally, you're not going to be alone. There's going to be a group of us holding signs together, pushing back on the left. That's what Sentinel offers to you, to start being in coordination at every level so we can see our policies not only just be a vision, but a reality in our states and our country. So sign up today. My name is Rebecca Warwick. I'll be here to answer any questions. I have business cards. Happy to talk with you after this workshop, but I'll hand it back over to Janae and Garrett. Thank you, Rebecca. Well, we can take, I think we have to close here in one moment, but I'll take this last question here. Yes, the answer is yes, but that doesn't mean that they're going to acknowledge that. I mean, Pelosi has already, in talking about, I think it was HR 4, talked about, needing to, they weren't going to bring it to a vote until later because they needed to get to where it was legally sound, constitutionally sound. They know that there's going to be lawsuits against this. She has just admitted that the current draft is not constitutional. So you're absolutely right, but that doesn't stop the left. So we can't wait for them to make their move. We have to be fighting at the state level and stopping this bad bill from going through. Because if we allow them to make a power grab, they will absolutely do it. So I'm going to close with this video. Rebecca just gave you her little blurb, but I also say we did not talk about this issue today, but if you want to, you can text CRT, that stands for Critical Race Theory. It's another very important issue that we're working on and fighting for at the state level, including state legislation. So you can text CRT to 51776. That's 51776 CRT. And that will get you more information about that. I'm going to show you this video, and then Garrett, if you have any closing thoughts.
We're in a cultural battle. That's why Heritage Action created the Sentinel program, to empower conservatives to speak up, take action, and to hold your lawmakers accountable. And when Sentinels speak, Congress listens. Together, we're going to hold the line and advance conservatism for generations to come.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for attending this session. I know it's early, but we are closing right on time here. If you have any questions, we're going to hang out. Feel free to come talk to us. Rebecca is obviously our star here in Colorado, so make sure you meet her. Hope you all enjoy this Western Conservative Summit, but you can find all of these things that we talked about today at heritageaction.com. We have other websites like saveourelections.com, et cetera, that you might want to look at, but all of them can be found at heritageaction.com. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.